After 2 years of complete silence, my son invited me to dinner. I was hoping for reconciliation, but I walked into a trap. As I stood at the door of my former home, the maid suddenly grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't go in there. Run away immediately." I trusted the stranger, hid, and watched from a distance. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The bouquet of roses felt heavier than it should as I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd given away 5 years ago. My house, the one I'd built with my own hands. Well, supervised the building of, anyway. The March sun glinted off the windows like they were winking at me, mocking my hope that tonight would be different. 2 years, that's how long it had been since I'd heard my son Brian's voice. 730 days of silence, broken only by a text message 3 days ago. "Dad, can we talk? Dinner at our place Friday, 7 p.m. Please come." I'm 67 years old. I spent 35 years as a district court judge, presiding over murderers, thieves, and liars. I've seen every manipulation tactic in the book. But when your own son reaches out after 2 years of nothing, you don't apply logic. You apply hope, like an idiot. I straightened my tie, the blue one Brian had given me for my 65th birthday, back when we still spoke, and walked toward the front door. The house stood there in its Memorial District glory, all brick and pristine landscaping, probably worth close to $2 million now. I'd signed it over to Brian and his wife Kimberly as a wedding gift. 5 years ago, I thought I was being generous. Now I lived in a cramped apartment in Midtown, but that was fine. Parents sacrifice for their children, right? My finger was inches from the doorbell when the door flew open. Rosalia stood there, her brown eyes wide with something that looked like terror. She'd been our housekeeper for 20 years, stayed on after my wife passed, continued working for Brian and Kimberly. The woman knew this family better than anyone. "Mr. Carroll," she whispered, her voice shaking. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist like a vice. "Don't go in there. Run. They've prepared something terrible." I stared at her. My brain tried to process her words, but they seemed to come from very far away. "Rosalia, what? Please!" Her grip tightened. "Trust me. You have to leave. Now." I'd cross-examined thousands of witnesses. You learn to read people, to spot the liars from the truth-tellers. Rosalia wasn't lying. The panic in her eyes was genuine, raw, terrified. "Where?" I asked quietly. "The neighbor's bushes. Hide. Watch. You'll understand. Please, Mr. Carroll. Please." Something in her voice made the decision for me. I stepped back, roses still clutched in my hand like a fool, and moved quickly across the lawn to the neighbor's tall hedges. I felt ridiculous, a former judge hiding in shrubbery like a teenager avoiding curfew. But I crouched there, my knees protesting, and watched my former home. 5 minutes. That's all it took for my world to tilt sideways. 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, but sirens silent. 4 officers emerged, hands on their belts, serious expressions locked in place. They approached the front door with the caution of people expecting trouble. The door opened, Kimberly stood there, and even from 50 yards away, I could see she'd been crying. Or pretending to cry. My judge's instinct kicked in automatically. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder. Mascara streaked her face. She looked like a victim. My stomach dropped like a stone in a well. One of the officers spoke to her. She gestured inside, said something I couldn't hear, then pointed in the direction I should have been, the direction I would have been if Rosalia hadn't stopped me. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. They weren't expecting me for dinner. They were expecting me for something else entirely. A trap, a setup. My own son had invited me here to destroy me. I watched as the officers searched the house, watched as Kimberly kept touching her torn blouse, kept shaking her head, kept playing the victim. Watched as Brian appeared in the doorway, his face a perfect mask of concern and confusion. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to tie a tie, to stand up for what's right. The boy who was currently trying to frame me for something. My hands were shaking. The roses had fallen somewhere in the bushes. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, couldn't feel anything except a cold rage settling into my bones like ice. After 30 minutes, the police left. I stayed hidden for another 20, watching as lights turned on and off in my former home. Finally, when my knees absolutely refused to support me any longer, I crept back to my car and drove. I don't remember the drive back to my apartment. I don't remember parking or taking the elevator up to the third floor or unlocking my door. I remember sitting in the dark of my living room, a room that could fit inside the foyer of the house I'd given away, and staring at nothing. My son had tried to set me up. The words kept repeating in my mind like a broken record. My son, my own flesh and blood, the child I'd raised alone after his mother died. What had they planned? What would have happened if I'd walked through that door? The torn blouse, the tears, the police already on their way. It wasn't hard to piece together. They were going to accuse me of something. Assault, maybe. Harassment. Something that would get me arrested, humiliated, destroyed. But why? I sat there in the dark and felt something inside me harden. 35 years as a judge teaches you patience. It teaches you that justice isn't always swift, but it's always possible. They wanted to destroy me. They'd have to do better than a torn blouse and fake tears. I was Richard Carroll. I'd spent 3.5 decades watching criminals try to outsmart the system. I knew every loophole, every precedent, every way the law could protect the innocent or punish the guilty. And my son and his wife had just made a very, very big mistake. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment's single armchair and watched the city lights blink through my window, thinking about all the moments I'd missed, all the warning signs I'd ignored because I wanted to believe in my son. 5 years ago, Brian's wedding day had been the happiest day of my life since my wife's death. I'd walked him down the aisle, his mother gone. I filled both roles, and I'd seen nothing but joy in his eyes. Kimberly had seemed perfect, beautiful, educated, charming, a financial analyst with a sharp mind and a sharper wardrobe. I remembered the rehearsal dinner. "Dad," Brian had said, pulling me aside, "I want you to know that Kimberly and I have been talking. We want you to feel like this house is still yours. You built it with Mom. We'll never forget that." I'd gotten emotional. Embarrassing, really, for a man who prided himself on composure. "Son, this house is yours now. Build your life here. Build your family here. That's all I want." Kimberly had hugged me that night. "You're the father I never had, Richard," she'd whispered. "I promise I'll take care of Brian. We'll take care of each other." Pretty words, poison wrapped in silk. The first sign came 6 months after the wedding. Thanksgiving. I'd always hosted Thanksgiving. It was tradition, my wife's favorite holiday. But that year, Brian called to say they'd be spending it with Kimberly's family. "You understand, right, Dad? We need to split time fairly." "Fair?" I'd nodded on the phone, said, "Of course, I understand." Spent the day alone with a rotisserie chicken and a terrible movie. Christmas came. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. Kimberly thought I'd told you we were doing Christmas Eve at her parents' this year. We must have gotten our wires crossed." "Wires crossed?" "Right." Then came the money requests. Small at first. "Dad, we're renovating the kitchen. Could you help out?" "Just 5,000. I'd helped. Of course I'd helped. The car broke down. Need a new one. Down payment's killing us. Property taxes are higher than we thought. There's this investment opportunity." That's where it started to change. The investment opportunity. Brian had come to my apartment, my cramped, sad little apartment that made him wrinkle his nose when he walked in, and sat across from me with papers and projections and promises. "It's a sure thing, Dad. Kimberly's firm is in on it. We're talking returns that could double our money in 2 years. But we need capital. I need you to invest your pension fund." I'd looked at the papers, looked at my son, seen something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Desperation mixed with something harder. Greed, maybe? Or fear? "Son, this is my retirement. Everything I have." "Exactly. Don't you want it to grow? Don't you trust me?" That's when Kimberly had appeared in my doorway. I hadn't realized she'd come with him, had been waiting in the car. "Richard," she'd said, her voice honey-sweet and razor-sharp, "I understand you're cautious. But Brian is your son. He's asking for your help. Don't you believe in him?" I'd felt the trap closing even then, but I'd tried to sidestep gracefully. "It's not about belief. It's about being smart with money. I've worked too hard." "You've worked too hard?" Kimberly's voice had gone cold. "Brian works hard too. But I guess that doesn't matter to you. I guess your son's success doesn't matter as much as your precious savings." The argument had escalated. Brian had called me selfish. Kimberly had called me controlling, said I was trying to keep Brian dependent, trying to keep him small. I'd defended myself, badly I'll admit, and they'd left. I'd called Brian the next day to apologize, left 3 voicemails, sent texts. Nothing. 2 weeks later, I'd driven to the house. Kimberly had answered the door. "Brian doesn't want to see you right now, Richard. You hurt him deeply. He needs space." Space. 2 years of space. Sitting in my dark apartment after the near miss at the house, I finally understood. It hadn't been about the investment at all. It had been a test. When I'd failed their test, when I'd refused to hand over my life savings, I'd become a problem, an obstacle. And now they wanted to remove that obstacle permanently. I thought about Brian as a child, 8 years old, learning to ride his bike without training wheels. He'd fallen, scraped his knee bloody, and I'd cleaned the wound while he cried. "Dad, I can't do it," he'd sobbed. "Yes, you can," I'd told him. "You get back up. You try again. That's what we do." He'd gotten back up. He'd learned to ride. That boy was gone. In his place was a man I didn't recognize, a man controlled by a woman who saw people as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be eliminated. The anger I'd felt at the house returned, but colder now, calculated. I'd spent 35 years in courtrooms watching bad people do bad things and face consequences. I knew how this worked. I knew the system inside and out. They thought I was just a lonely old man, easily manipulated or easily destroyed. They thought wrong. I stood up, turned on the light, and found my phone. I had calls to make, plans to develop, evidence to gather. Rosalia had saved me tonight, but I needed to know what they'd planned, what they'd hoped to accomplish, and then I needed to make sure they faced every consequence the law would allow. Because I was Richard Carroll, former district court judge, and I was about to teach my son a lesson he should have learned when he was 8 years old. Actions have consequences, and you don't get to destroy people without answering for it. The game was on, and this time I intended to win. I stared at Rosalia's number on my phone for 10 minutes before calling. The morning sun filtered through my apartment blinds, casting prison bar shadows across my coffee table. Appropriate, really. I'd almost walked into a cage of my own son's making. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Carroll?" "Rosalia." My voice came out rougher than intended. "I need to know what you heard. Everything." There was a pause. I heard her breathing, heard the click of a door closing. She was finding privacy. Smart woman. "They were in the study," she began quietly. "The night before they sent you that text. I was cleaning the upstairs hallway, and their voices carried. Mrs. Kimberly was excited. She said, 'Once we get the restraining order, the rest will be easy.'" My hand tightened around the phone. "Go on." "Mr. Bryan asked what if you didn't show up, and she laughed, Mr. Carroll. She said, 'He'll show up. He's desperate to see his precious son. Old men are so predictable.'" Rosalia's voice cracked. Then she explained the plan. They would accuse you of attacking her, of inappropriate behavior. The police were already on standby. She'd called them before you even arrived. Said she feared for her safety because you'd been sending threatening messages. I hadn't sent a single message. The text invitation had come from Brian's phone to mine. One way. "Once they had you arrested," Rosalia continued, "they planned to petition for a psychological evaluation, paint you as unstable, dangerous, then guardianship, control of your finances, your pension, everything." The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. They wanted to have me declared incompetent. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Kimberly said you'd be taken care of in a facility somewhere, and they'd finally have what they deserved." What they deserved. The house hadn't been enough. They wanted everything. Wanted to put me in a home and drain my accounts while I drooled in front of a television. "Thank you, Rosalia," I managed. "You saved my life. You were always kind to me, Mr. Carroll. When my daughter was sick, you paid for her medicine. You didn't have to do that." Her voice strengthened. "I won't let them destroy you. What do you need?" What did I need? Evidence. Proof. A way to turn their trap back on them. "Stay there if you can," I said. "Keep your eyes and ears open, but be careful. Don't let them suspect." "I understand." After we hung up, I sat in the silence and felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. They'd been so sure of themselves, so certain I'd walk into their trap like a lamb. Time to show them what a cornered judge could do. I spent the next 3 days watching my son. Not stalking, nothing illegal, just observing from public places. A coffee shop across from his office building, a park bench near the restaurant where he had lunch, the parking lot of the gym Kimberly frequented. I felt like a detective on a stakeout, except the criminal I was tracking had once called me Daddy and cried in my arms after nightmare. Tuesday afternoon, I watched Brian meet someone at a cafe downtown. A lawyer, by the look of him. Expensive suit, leather briefcase, that particular air of practiced sympathy attorneys cultivate. They sat in a corner booth, and I positioned myself near the window with a newspaper and reading glasses. Brian looked terrible. His tie was crooked, his hair uncombed. He kept running his hands through it, making it worse. The lawyer spoke in low tones, sliding documents across the table. Brian's hands shook as he signed them. What were they preparing for? A restraining order application, probably. Evidence of my supposed instability. Character witnesses, perhaps. People Kimberly would have coached to describe me as aggressive, unpredictable, senile. The lawyer left first. Brian stayed, staring into his coffee cup like it might contain answers. For a moment, I saw the boy he'd been, uncertain, seeking guidance. Then Kimberly arrived. The transformation was instant. Brian straightened up, put on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Kimberly slid into the booth beside him, not across from him, beside him, and placed her hand on his arm. Possessive. Controlling. I watched their interaction with the same attention I'd given to countless witness testimonies. Kimberly did most of the talking, her lips moving rapidly, her free hand gesturing sharply. Brian nodded, nodded, nodded. When he tried to speak, she cut him off with a touch, a look, a word I couldn't hear but could see the effect of. He was a puppet. My son had become a marionette, and Kimberly held every string. They discussed something intently. Plan B, maybe, as Rosalia had mentioned. What happens if the father survives? I lip-read what I could. Money, lawyer, insurance, facility. Each word was a nail in the coffin they were building for me. Kimberly's confidence was striking. She sat with perfect posture, her expression calm, almost serene. She believed she'd already won. Why wouldn't she? She'd isolated Brian from his father, manipulated him into demanding money, turned that rejection into 2 years of silence, and now orchestrated a scheme to destroy me completely. Textbook sociopath, really. I'd seen enough of them in my courtroom. Brian looked haunted. His eyes darted around the cafe, never settling. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping from across the room. When Kimberly touched his hand, he flinched slightly before forcing himself to relax. He was afraid, not of me, of her, or maybe of himself, of what he'd become. I felt a flash of pity, quickly extinguished. He'd made his choices. He'd chosen her over me, greed over integrity, lies over truth. Whatever happened next, he'd earned it. They left together, Kimberly's hand on Brian's back, steering him like a child. I waited 5 minutes before following at a distance, watching them climb into the Mercedes I'd helped Brian buy 2 years ago. Just a small loan, Dad. I'll pay you back. He never had. That evening I sat in my apartment and made a list. Not on paper, too risky, but mentally, the way I used to prepare for complex cases. Evidence needed. Rosalia's testimony. Financial records showing their debt. Documentation of the house transfer. Proof of their scheme. Recordings, if possible. Legal avenues. Challenge the house gift as fraudulent conveyance. Criminal complaint for attempted false imprisonment. Fraud. Conspiracy. Civil suit for damages. Professionals required. Attorney. Private investigator, maybe, though I could do most of the surveillance myself. Financial analyst to trace their money troubles. Weakness to exploit. Brian's guilt. His fear. The cracks in their relationship that I'd seen in that cafe. The fact that Kimberly was so confident she'd get sloppy. And their biggest mistake, underestimating me. Thinking that because I'd given them a house, I'd give them everything. Thinking that because I'd been silent for 2 years, I'd stay silent forever. They thought I was just a lonely old man, fading away in a sad apartment. They forgot I'd spent 35 years destroying people who underestimated the law. Gerald Morrison's office hadn't changed in the 15 years since I'd last been there. Same dark wood paneling, same leather chairs, same view of downtown Houston's skyline. We'd crossed paths in court dozens of times, him defending, me presiding, and we'd maintained the kind of professional respect that comes from worthy opponents. Richard, he stood when his secretary showed me in, extending his hand. It's been a while. I heard you retired. 3 years ago. I shook his hand and sat without preamble. Gerald, I need your help, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is both personal and urgent. His expression shifted to alert attention. Good. I'd always appreciated his ability to focus. I laid it out cleanly, chronologically, the way I'd present evidence in court. The house gift 5 years ago, the gradual isolation, the money demands, the 2 years of silence, the dinner invitation, Rosalia's warning, the police trap I'd narrowly avoided, the overheard conversation about guardianship and financial control. Gerald listened without interrupting, taking notes in his precise handwriting. When I finished, he sat back and studied me. That's attempted fraud at minimum, he said slowly. Possibly conspiracy. False imprisonment, if they'd succeeded in getting you arrested on false charges. And the guardianship angle. That's calculated, premeditated exploitation. He tapped his pen against his notepad, but proving it will be challenging. I know. That's why I need your expertise. He nodded. The house gift. That's interesting. In Texas, we can challenge transfers made with fraudulent intent. If you can prove they planned to exploit you from the beginning, or that there was undue influence, we might void the transfer entirely. They were already in debt when they married, I said. I didn't know it at the time, but I can get those records now. That helps establish motive. Gerald made more notes. What about the recent incident? Any evidence? Rosalia's testimony. She's willing to go on record. The housekeeper's word against theirs. He frowned. It's something, but we need more. Can she get recordings? Legally? Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings. If she's present during the conversations and consents to recording them, it's admissible. Given that you're technically still the legal owner of the house until a court says otherwise, you could authorize her as your agent. I felt a smile pull at my lips. My first real smile in days. That's elegant. That's the law. Gerald leaned forward. Richard, I need to be clear about something. This will get ugly. They'll fight back, probably accuse you of harassment, of abusing your judicial connections, of being a bitter old man who can't let go. The press might get involved. Your reputation could take hits. My reputation? I almost laughed. Gerald, they tried to have me arrested on false charges so they could steal my pension and warehouse me in a facility somewhere. I think my reputation can handle a legal fight. Fair point. He studied me for a long moment. You understand this isn't about revenge, legally speaking. This is about protecting your rights and holding them accountable for criminal conspiracy. Of course, I met his eyes. Revenge would be petty. Justice, on the other hand, is what I've spent my entire career pursuing. I'll need a retainer, this kind of case. Money isn't an issue. I'd lived modestly for 3 years, saved most of my pension. I want the best possible outcome within the boundaries of the law. I want them to face every consequence their actions have earned. Gerald's expression shifted to something that might have been approval. Then let's build a case that would make your former courtroom proud. Over the next 2 weeks, I became intimately familiar with the machinery of investigation I'd only observed from the bench. Gerald brought in a financial analyst who traced Brian and Kimberly's money troubles like a bloodhound following a scent. The picture that emerged was damning. Kimberly had come into the marriage with $87,000 in debt, credit cards, personal loans, a judgment from a previous landlord in California. Brian had been solvent then, but the spending had started immediately. The kitchen renovation I'd funded had cost twice what they claimed, the difference going to pay down Kimberly's debts. The car loan, the property taxes, all inflated, all excuses to extract money. Then came the big investment scheme I'd refused. They'd tried 3 other sources, Brian's uncle, Kimberly's parents, a business partner of Brian's, and been rejected by all. The rejection pattern suggested I hadn't been their only target. They're desperate, Gerald said, spreading the financial records across his desk. Between credit card minimum payments, the mortgage on the house, and car loans, they're barely staying afloat. One major expense and they'll drown. That major expense being my legal fees to challenge the house transfer. Exactly, he smiled grimly. The irony is poetic. I contacted Rosalia again, this time with Gerald present on speakerphone to explain the recording authorization. She agreed immediately. I'll be careful, she promised. They trust me now, or she does anyway. Mrs. Kimberly talks freely around me like I'm furniture. That's their mistake, I said. People who treat others as furniture forget that furniture has ears. 3 days later, Rosalia called with audio files. Her voice shook as she explained what she'd captured. Kimberly and Brian discussing their backup plans if I'd somehow escaped the trap. The word they used was survived, like I was a disaster they'd weathered. In the recordings, Kimberly's voice was ice-cold calculation. We'll try the incompetence angle anyway. Find a sympathetic doctor. Show them your father's erratic texts. We'll write some ourselves if we need to. Old men forget things, right? We just need enough to get a foot in the door for guardianship proceedings. Brian's voice hesitant. I don't know if I can do that. He'll fight it. Kimberly, sharp. He's 67 years old and living in a dumpy apartment. What's he going to fight with? You're his only family, Brian. The court will side with us. I listened to those recordings 3 times, memorizing every inflection, the casual cruelty, the calculation, the absolute certainty that they'd win. They'd forgotten something crucial. I'd spent 35 years learning exactly how the system worked, how to build cases, how to anticipate opposition strategies. They'd brought a knife to a courtroom fight. Gerald filed the initial paperwork on a Friday afternoon, petition to void the house transfer based on fraudulent inducement, evidence of financial exploitation, request for compensatory damages. Simultaneously, we filed a criminal complaint with the Houston Police Department, attempted fraud, conspiracy to file false charges, possible elder abuse. As I signed the documents, I felt that old thrill of a case coming together, pieces clicking into perfect legal alignment. 40 years of judging criminals. Now I'd have to prove my own son was one. The papers would be served Monday morning. I could picture their faces when the process server knocked on the door of my house. I'd show them what survival looked like. Detective Carla Sullivan had the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Sharp, assessing. The eyes of someone who'd spent years sorting truth from lies. When Gerald introduced us at Houston Police Department headquarters, she shook my hand firmly and gestured to her office. Judge Carroll, she said, settling behind her desk. Or should I say Mr. Carroll now? Richard is fine. I sat across from her, noting the case files stacked precisely, the commendations on the wall, the coffee cup with a faded HPD logo. Organized, detail-oriented, experienced. Good. Your attorney filed an interesting complaint, she continued, opening a folder. Conspiracy, attempted fraud, filing false charges. Those are serious allegations against your son and daughter-in-law. They are. I met her gaze steadily. And they're all true. I have evidence. Over the next hour, I walked her through everything. The dinner invitation after 2 years of silence. Rosalia's warning. The police arriving at an empty scene. The overheard conversations about guardianship and financial control. The recordings of them planning their backup schemes. Sullivan listened with that particular intensity cops develop when a case clicks into place. When I finished, she sat back. Your housekeeper, Rosalia Garcia. She's willing to testify? Under oath. She's already given Gerald a sworn statement. And you have recordings of the defendants discussing their plans? Multiple recordings, all legally obtained under Texas one-party consent law. A slight smile crossed Sullivan's face. You know your law. I spent 35 years applying it. Now I'm relying on it. She called Rosalia in first. I waited in an adjacent room, watching through the one-way glass as Rosalia sat ramrod straight in the interview room, hands folded in her lap. She wore her Sunday dress, respectful, dignified, and when Sullivan asked her to describe what she'd overheard, Rosalia's voice never wavered. Mrs. Kimberly said they needed to get Mr. Carroll arrested so they could claim he was dangerous, Rosalia testified. She said once they had a restraining order, they could petition for guardianship. She laughed and said, Old men are so predictable. Sullivan took notes, her expression neutral. And Mr. Brian Carroll, what was his role? He was scared, I think, but he went along with it. He said, What if Dad doesn't show up? And Mrs. Kimberly said, He'll show up. He's desperate. Rosalia's voice cracked slightly. Mr. Carroll raised that boy alone after his wife died. To see him plan this, it broke my heart. After Rosalia left, Sullivan brought Brian in. I leaned forward, watching my son enter the interview room like a man walking to his execution. He looked worse than he had at the cafe. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hands trembled as he sat down, and he couldn't seem to meet Sullivan's gaze for more than a second at a time. "Mr. Carroll," Sullivan began, "I need to ask you about the evening of March 15th. You invited your father to dinner?" "Yes." Brian's voice was barely audible. I wanted to reconnect." "After 2 years of no contact?" "Yes." "Why then?" Brian's hands twisted together. We thought it was time." "We?" Sullivan's tone sharpened slightly. "You and your wife?" "Yes." Sullivan let the silence stretch. I knew the technique. Let them fill the void. Let nervousness loosen tongues. Brian fidgeted, uncrossed, and recrossed his legs. "Your father didn't come that evening," Sullivan continued, "but police were called to your home. Why?" "Kimberly, my wife. She thought she heard someone outside. We got scared." "Scared of what?" "We didn't know. It was dark." I watched my son lie, watched him avoid eye contact, watched his fingers drum against his thigh. 35 years of watching witnesses, and I could read guilt like a neon sign. Sullivan pressed, "You called police before your father was supposed to arrive. The call log shows—" "I need to talk to my lawyer," Brian blurted. Perfect timing. The interview room door opened, and Kimberly walked in, her lawyer, someone expensive by the suit, trailing behind. "This interview is over," the lawyer announced, but Kimberly moved straight to Brian, placed her hand on his shoulder with that familiar possessive grip, and leaned down to whisper something in his ear. Brian flinched but nodded. Sullivan watched this with interest. So did I. Control, I thought. Even here, in a police interrogation room, she couldn't help herself. She needed to manage Brian, to keep him on script. "Mrs. Carroll," Sullivan said calmly, "I'd like to interview you separately." "My client doesn't have to," the lawyer began. "I'll talk," Kimberly interrupted, ice-cold confidence in every syllable. "I have nothing to hide." They moved Brian out. Kimberly took his seat, smoothed her skirt, and gave Sullivan a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Detective, I understand you're investigating some complaints from my father-in-law. I want you to know we were simply trying to protect ourselves." "Protect yourselves from what?" "Richard has been unstable since his retirement, making accusations, sending disturbing messages." "We haven't found any messages from him to you or your husband." Kimberly's smile tightened microscopically. "He's clever about covering his tracks. That's what makes him dangerous." I watched her perform, watched her deploy that calm, rational tone. She was good, I'd give her that. If I hadn't known the truth, hadn't heard the recordings, I might have believed her. "Ms. Garcia, your housekeeper, says she overheard you and your husband planning to falsely accuse Richard Carroll," Sullivan said. "What's your response?" "Rosalia," Kimberly's laugh was dismissive. "She's always been jealous of me. Richard clearly manipulated her, paid her, probably, to say these things." Sullivan showed no reaction. "We have recordings," Kimberly's lawyer cut in. "Illegally obtained recordings aren't—" "Actually," I murmured to Gerald, who stood beside me in the observation room, "they're perfectly legal under Texas law." On the other side of the glass, Sullivan explained the same thing. Kimberly's face went very still, though her smile remained frozen in place. "I think," her lawyer said carefully, "we're done here until we can review all materials." After they left, Sullivan came to find me. "That was enlightening," she said. "Your son is one breath away from confessing. Your daughter-in-law, though—" "She's a predator," I finished. "She believes she's smarter than everyone else. That confidence will be her downfall. The recordings help immensely. I'll forward this to the DA's office, but frankly, Mr. Carroll," she paused, "this is also a civil matter. Your house, your finances. Criminal charges will take time." "I know," I smiled grimly. "That's why I've also filed a civil suit. Multiple fronts, detective. Always attack on multiple fronts." Gerald and I left the police station together. The April sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. "They're rattled," Gerald observed. "They should be. But Kimberly will fight. She'll hire the best lawyers she can afford, spend every penny they have. Which means they'll have nothing left for the house payments, the credit card minimums. Exactly. I stopped at my car, looked back at the police building. Even if they somehow win in court, they'll lose everything fighting. They're drowning Gerald, and I'm the one who opened the floodgates. It felt like justice. No, it felt like the beginning of justice. Monday morning arrived with brutal sunshine and the kind of clarity that comes from knowing you're about to change everything. I sat in my apartment with coffee and my phone, waiting for Rosalia's call. It came at 9:47 a.m. "They just got served," she whispered. "The process server left 30 seconds ago. Mr. Carroll, you should hear them." "Can you record it?" I asked. "Already am." There was a rustling sound as she positioned her phone. "Wait." Then I heard it. Kimberly's voice, sharp with confusion. "What is this?" Papers rustling. A long, terrible silence. Then Brian, his voice climbing. "Dad filed a lawsuit? He's suing us?" "Let me see that." Kimberly's voice, harder now, more rustling, then absolute quiet, the kind of silence that comes before explosions. "No." Kimberly's voice emerged strangled, disbelieving. "No, this isn't—" "What?" Brian demanded. "What does it say?" "He's challenging the house gift. Claims it was fraudulent. He wants the house back." Kimberly's voice rose. "He wants the house back." "He can't do that." "Can he do that?" "He's also filed criminal complaints. Attempted fraud. Conspiracy to file false charges. Elder abuse." Kimberly's voice cracked. "You said he wouldn't fight back. You said he was just a lonely old man who'd take whatever we gave him." "I didn't think." "You didn't think?" Kimberly's shriek was music to my ears. "He's a judge, Brian. He knows every lawyer in Houston. He knows the system inside and out. And you said he was harmless." "He was harmless. He never fought back before." "Well, he's fighting now." Something slammed. Fist on table, I guessed. "Do you understand what this means? If he voids the gift, we lose the house. The house we've been borrowing against. The house we took out a second mortgage on. We'll owe more than—" She stopped abruptly. I imagined her doing the math, watching her perfect plan collapse into numbers that didn't add up. "We'll get a lawyer," Brian said weakly. "We'll fight it." "With what money, Brian? With what money?" Kimberly's voice had gone from rage to something colder, more frightening. "We're maxed out. The credit cards, the loans, everything. We spent it all because we thought we had time. We thought we'd have the house and his pension, and then we'll refinance." "You can't refinance a house that isn't yours." Her laugh was brittle, breaking. "Don't you see? He's already won. Even if we somehow keep the house, we'll spend everything we have on legal fees. We're destroyed either way." Rosalia's voice, barely audible. "Mrs. Kimberly, can I get you anything?" "Get out!" Kimberly screamed. I heard footsteps, a door closing, then Rosalia's voice, clearer now. "Mr. Carroll, I'm in the laundry room. They can't hear me." "You did perfectly," I told her. "Are you safe?" "Yes. Mrs. Kimberly is angry, but she won't hurt me. She needs me to testify that everything was fine with them." Rosalia's tone was dry. "I don't think she realizes I'm the one who recorded her." I smiled. "Keep recording when you can. Stay safe. This is almost over." After we hung up, I called Gerald. "They know." "How'd they take it?" "About as well as a house of cards takes a hurricane." Gerald's chuckle was satisfied. "They'll hire someone. Probably Daniel Chen. He's expensive, but good. Handles a lot of desperate cases. Let them hire whoever they want. We have the evidence, the law, and the truth." "Don't get overconfident, Richard. Chen will fight dirty." "So will we. Within the law, of course." "Of course." That afternoon, I treated myself to a drive past the house. My house, I was already thinking of it that way again. The Mercedes sat in the driveway, Brian visible through the front window, pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling every lawyer in Houston, getting quotes he couldn't afford. I didn't stop, just drove past slowly, like a neighbor taking an afternoon drive, and savored the image of panic I'd created. 2 days later, Gerald called with news. They hired Chen, as predicted, paid him a $30,000 retainer, probably their last savings. He's already filed a response claiming undue influence. Elder abuse claims are baseless, and you're engaging in harassment. Standard defense tactics. He's also filed a motion to dismiss the criminal complaints, claiming false statements, and a countersuit for emotional distress. I'd expected this. When you corner predators, they bite back. What's our response? We file the financial records showing their debt, the recordings showing premeditation, and Rosalia's sworn testimony. I'm also requesting expedited hearing, given the property dispute. Perfect. A week later, Rosalia called again. They're fighting. Every day. Every night. Mrs. Kimberly blames Mr. Bryan for everything. She says he ruined her life, that she should have married someone smarter. He just sits there and takes it. Is he still going along with their defense? I think so. But Mr. Carroll, he looks awful, like he hasn't slept in days. He keeps staring at old photos of you two, from when he was a boy. I found him crying in the study yesterday. Something tightened in my chest. I ignored it. What about Kimberly? Cold, calculating. She's planning something, I can tell. She keeps making phone calls in private, talking to their lawyer constantly. Keep me informed. But Rosalia's observation nagged at me. Bryan crying over old photos. Part of me, a very small, very foolish part, wanted to call him, to offer some way out of the mess he'd created. Then I remembered watching from the bushes as police arrived to arrest me for crimes I hadn't committed. Remembered Kimberly's torn blouse, her fake tears. Remembered the recordings of them planning to have me declared incompetent and locked away. No. Bryan had made his choice. Now he'd live with the consequences. I sat in my apartment that evening with a glass of scotch, my one vice, and thought about watching their perfect plan crumble. Kimberly's face going pale as she read the lawsuit, her voice cracking as she realized they'd underestimated me. Bryan's hands trembling as he understood his father wasn't the weak old man he'd believed. It was better than any verdict I'd ever delivered from the bench, almost as satisfying as the trial would be, because that's where the real show would happen, in court, under oath, with every lie exposed to harsh legal light. I raised my glass to the empty room. To justice, I murmured, and to teaching my son a lesson he should have learned long ago. The scotch burned going down, but the satisfaction burned brighter. The Harris County Courthouse felt like home. I'd walked these halls for 35 years, presided over cases in courtrooms just like the one I sat in now. Except this time, I wasn't wearing robes. I was wearing my best suit and sitting at the plaintiff's table, about to testify about the night my own son tried to destroy me. Judge Patricia Whitmore presided, not a friend, but a colleague I'd respected during my tenure. She was fair, meticulous, and wouldn't give me any special treatment. Good. I didn't need favors. I needed justice. Gerald rose for my direct examination. Mr. Carroll, please describe the events of March 15th. I took a breath and began. I received a text message from my son Bryan after 2 years of silence. He invited me to dinner at 7 p.m. He said we needed to talk. I paused, letting that sink in. I was hopeful. I thought perhaps we could reconcile. What happened when you arrived? I never made it inside. Rosalia Garcia, who had worked for our family for 20 years, intercepted me at the door. She was terrified. She grabbed my arm and said, "Don't go in there. Run. They've prepared something terrible." Across the aisle, Kimberly sat rigid, her face a mask. Bryan stared at his hands. I trusted her, I continued. I hid in the neighbor's bushes and watched. 5 minutes later, 2 police cars arrived. I saw my daughter-in-law meet the officers with tears on her face and her blouse torn at the shoulder. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. I realized then what the dinner invitation really was. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was a trap. They intended to have me arrested on false charges, frame me as violent or unstable, and use that to petition for guardianship over me. They wanted control of my finances, my pension, my life. Gerald nodded. That's a serious allegation. Do you have evidence? We do, Your Honor. Daniel Chen, their attorney, jumped up. Objection. The witness is speculating about intent. Your Honor, Gerald interrupted smoothly. We have recordings that will demonstrate intent quite clearly. May we proceed? Whitmore gestured. Proceed. Gerald played the first recording, Rosalia's voice clear and steady, providing context. This was recorded in the study on March 14th, the night before Mr. Carroll was invited to dinner. Then Kimberly's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. Once we get the restraining order, the rest will be easy. Bryan, stop worrying. Your father is predictable. He's desperate to see his precious son. Old men are so easy to manipulate. I watched Brian's face turn the color of old newspaper. Gray, lifeless, defeated. Kimberly's recorded voice continued. We'll tell the police he attacked me. I'll have the torn blouse, the tears. You just have to look scared and back up my story. Once he's arrested, we file for emergency guardianship. Claim he's mentally unstable, a danger to himself and others. Brian's voice on the recording hesitant. What if he doesn't show up? Kimberly impatient. He'll show up. I already called the police and told them to be on standby. Said I feared for my safety because of his threatening messages. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Whitmore's gavel came down sharply. Order! Gerald stopped the recording. Mr. Carroll never sent any threatening messages, did he? No. The text invitation was the only communication in 2 years. One message from his phone to mine. Chen stood again. Your Honor, the defense questions the authenticity and legality of these recordings. They were legally obtained under Texas one-party consent law. Gerald cut in. Ms. Garcia had authorization from Mr. Carroll, who is the legal owner of the property where the recordings were made. We have documentation. Chen's jaw tightened. He knew he was losing. Gerald played another clip, this one shorter, Kimberly's voice. When the police arrive and he's not there, we'll say he fled after attacking me. It adds credibility. Then we move forward with the guardianship petition. Once we have control of his accounts, we can finally live the way we deserve. The way they deserved, on my pension, in my house, while I rotted in some facility. I looked directly at Brian and Kimberly. Brian couldn't meet my eyes. His hands trembled visibly, clenched together on the table. Kimberly sat frozen, her back straight, but I could see the muscles in her jaw working, her knuckles white where she gripped the armrest. So there was your dinner, I said quietly, my voice carrying in the silent courtroom. The menu featured my freedom, my dignity, and my life savings. Fortunately, the maitre d' warned me before I could be seated. A few people in the gallery actually laughed before catching themselves. Even Judge Whitmore's lips twitched. Chen tried damage control on cross-examination. Mr. Carroll, isn't it true you have a contentious relationship with your son? We had 2 years of no relationship. I don't think that qualifies as contentious. You refused to invest in his business ventures. You were controlling, withholding financial support. I declined to hand over my entire pension fund to an investment scheme I couldn't verify. That's called being prudent, not controlling. You're using your connections in the legal system to wage a vendetta. I'm using the legal system exactly as it's designed to be used, to seek justice when someone attempts fraud. I smiled thinly. If that's a vendetta, then every plaintiff who ever filed suit is guilty of the same. Chen couldn't shake me. 35 years of courtroom experience meant I knew every trick, every trap, every way a lawyer might try to discredit testimony. When I stepped down, Gerald called Rosalia. She testified clearly, calmly, about overhearing their plans, about warning me, about recording subsequent conversations on my authorization. Chen attacked her credibility, jealousy of Kimberly, financial incentive to help me. But Rosalia held firm. I worked for the Carroll family for 20 years, she said quietly. I watched Mr. Carroll raise Brian alone after his wife died. I watched him sacrifice everything for that boy. When I heard them planning to destroy him, I couldn't stay silent. Some things matter more than a paycheck. By the time Judge Whitmore adjourned for lunch, the damage was done. I could see it in Chen's posture, in the way Brian and Kimberly wouldn't look at each other. We're winning, Gerald murmured as we left. We haven't won yet, I replied, but I couldn't help smiling. The afternoon session brought financial experts who testified about Brian and Kimberly's debt, their borrowing patterns, their desperation. Judge Whitmore took notes, asked pointed questions, and finally announced she'd order a forensic financial examination and reconvene in 30 days. As we filed out, I caught Kimberly's eye. For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw fear there, raw and undeniable. Good. Now she knew how it felt. They came out swinging. I had to admire the strategy, even as I hated the tactics. 3 days after the hearing, Gerald called. They've filed a countersuit, emotional distress, harassment, abusive legal process. They're claiming you're weaponizing the court system to punish Brian for growing independent. That's absurd. It's also strategic. They're trying to muddy the waters, make you look vindictive. Chen knows he's losing the main case, so he's creating chaos. The local news picked it up that evening. I watched from my apartment as Kimberly stood on the courthouse steps in a demure dress, her expression sorrowful. "I'm heartbroken," she told the reporter, dabbing at her eyes. Richard Carroll can't accept that his son is an adult with his own life. This lawsuit, these accusations, it's revenge because Brian wouldn't hand over his entire future to be controlled by his father. The reporter, young and earnest, ate it up. "Some are calling Mr. Carroll a bitter old judge, abusing his connections." I turned off the TV. Bitter old judge. Right. My phone rang. "Don't worry about it," Gerald said. "Public opinion doesn't matter in court. The evidence does, but it still stung. I'd spent 35 years building a reputation for fairness, for integrity. Now my son's wife was painting me as a tyrant on the evening news. The next day brought worse news. Chen had hired a digital forensics expert who claimed the recordings showed signs of editing. Never mind that our own expert had certified them as authentic. Chen was planting doubt. "Motion to exclude the recordings as evidence," Gerald told me. "He's arguing they're unreliable." Can he win that? No. But he can delay. Make us spend time and money fighting it. Whitmore will have to hold another hearing, get expert testimony from both sides, which costs money they don't have. I smiled grimly. Let them dig their hole deeper. But the attacks kept coming. Anonymous letters to Judge Whitmore's office, claiming I was intimidating witnesses. A complaint to the Bar Association about Gerald's conduct. Articles in legal blogs questioning whether former judges should be allowed to sue in jurisdictions where they'd served. "They're desperate," Gerald said during an emergency meeting, throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. "It's working, though. We're spending time defending instead of attacking." "Only temporarily." Gerald spread new documents across his desk. Because while they were busy with their PR campaign, I was busy too. Bank statements showing they took out a second mortgage on the house 3 months ago. Credit card statements showing luxury purchases the same week they claimed to be barely surviving. And this, he slid over a document with satisfaction. "Kimberly has 3 active judgments against her in California, Nevada, and Arizona. Total debt, $142,000. That's in addition to the debt we already documented." I studied the papers. So they weren't just in debt. They were drowning. Exactly. And the house, your house, was their life raft. They needed you out of the way so they could borrow against it freely, maybe even sell it. My phone buzzed. Brian's number. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Dad?" His voice was hoarse, broken. "Dad, please, can we talk?" "We're talking now. Not like this. In person. Please. I need to explain." "Explain what? How you planned to have me arrested? How you wanted to lock me away and steal everything I've worked for?" "It wasn't my idea. Kimberly, she convinced me you were getting old, that you needed protection." "Protection?" I laughed, harsh and bitter. "Is that what you call it?" "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I could take it back. But you can't. That's the thing about choices, Brian. You made yours. Now you live with the consequences." I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But Dad, she's destroying me. The lawyer fees. The fights. I can't sleep. I can't think. I've lost everything. My job let me go because of the scandal. We're going to lose the house anyway." "Good," I said coldly. "It was never yours to keep. Please, I'm begging you. Drop the suit. I'll sign the house over. I'll pay back everything. Just please stop." I closed my eyes. For just a moment, I heard the 8-year-old boy crying over scraped knees, the teenager asking for help with homework, the young man thanking me at his college graduation. Then I remembered torn blouses and fake tears and plans to lock me away. "You wanted me gone, Brian. You get your wish, but not the way you planned." I paused. "See you in court." I hung up before he could respond. Gerald watched me carefully. That must have been hard. It was necessary. I stood, straightened my jacket. "What's our next move?" "The forensic financial report comes back next week. Once Whitmore sees the full scope of their borrowing and spending, she'll rule in our favor on the house transfer. Then it's just a matter of the criminal charges. And their countersuit? It'll die on the vine. No merit, No evidence. Chen knows it. He's just making noise. A week later, the expert's report landed like a bomb. Pages of documentation showing systematic financial deception, fraudulent borrowing, deliberate exploitation of the house gift. The judge who reviewed it called it one of the most clear-cut cases of fraudulent conveyance he'd seen. Chen tried one last desperate move, claiming I'd coerced Rosalia's testimony. Whitmore shut it down in 3 sentences. I sat in my apartment that night and felt something shift. Not victory, not yet, but inevitability. The machinery of justice had started turning, and nothing they did could stop it now. The final hearing was scheduled for June, 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until I'd either reclaim everything they'd tried to take, or watch them somehow escape consequences. But I'd built this case carefully, brick by legal brick, and I knew, with the certainty that comes from decades in courtrooms, how it would end. They'd gambled everything on my weakness. Time to collect their debt. June 23rd arrived with oppressive humidity and cloudless skies. I dressed in my best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd worn for important verdicts when I was still on the bench. Gerald met me outside the courthouse, his expression carefully neutral. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 3 months." Judge Whitmore's courtroom was packed. I recognized a few reporters in the back rows, some lawyers I'd known over the years, curious observers drawn by the drama of a former judge suing his own son. Brian and Kimberly sat at the defense table with Chen, who looked like a man about to watch his ship sink. Whitmore entered. We all rose, and she wasted no time. "I've reviewed all submissions, expert reports, testimony, and evidence. This is my ruling on Carol vs. Carol." The courtroom went silent. I could hear Brian's breathing from 15 feet away, rapid, shallow, panicked. First, regarding the petition to void the gift of real property. Whitmore adjusted her glasses, looked directly at Brian and Kimberly. The evidence presented shows clear fraudulent intent. Text messages, recordings, and financial documents demonstrate that the defendants accepted the property gift while simultaneously planning to exploit the plaintiff for additional funds. When refused, they orchestrated an elaborate scheme to have him arrested on false charges, establishing grounds for guardianship and financial control. Kimberly's face went absolutely white. Not pale. White, like someone had drained every drop of blood from her body. Her hands clutched the table edge, knuckles sharp as knives. "The gift transfer is hereby declared void ab initio, invalid from the beginning. The property reverts to Richard Carroll. The defendants will vacate within 30 days. Brian made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. His lawyer put a steadying hand on his shoulder, but Brian was already crumbling, his head dropping to his hands. "Second, regarding damages." Whitmore's voice remained steady, clinical. "The defendants are jointly and severally liable for court costs, attorney fees, and compensatory damages in the amount of $85,000. Payment plan terms can be negotiated, but the judgment stands." $85,000 they didn't have. I watched Kimberly's throat work, watched her try to swallow, try to speak, try to maintain that icy composure, but her hands betrayed her, trembling so badly she had to press them flat against the table to hide it. "Finally," Whitmore continued, "I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. The evidence of conspiracy and attempted fraud is substantial and warrants prosecution." That's when Kimberly broke. Not obviously, she didn't scream or cry, but I saw it, the way her shoulders sagged, the way her perfect posture collapsed inch by inch, the way she looked at Brian with something that might have been rage or might have been despair, and he couldn't even meet her eyes. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down like a guillotine. People started moving, talking in hushed voices, but I sat frozen, watching them. Chen was speaking urgently to Kimberly, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at nothing, her face a mask of shock that had cracked beyond repair. Brian was openly weeping now, his body shaking with sobs that his lawyer couldn't contain. I felt empty, not triumphant, not vindicated, just hollow, like I'd won a war but lost something I couldn't name. 3 weeks later, the DA called. "We've reached plea agreements with both defendants," she told me. "Mrs. Carroll gets 2 years probation, 200 hours community service, and a no-contact order. Your son gets 1 year probation and mandatory counseling. They both agreed, rather than risk trial. Good, I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. The day they signed the plea agreements, I watched from the courthouse hallway. Kimberly signed with a pen that shook in her hand, her lawyer guiding her through each line. Her spine was straight, she'd regained that much, but her hands told the real story. When she finished, she walked out without looking at anyone, her heels clicking on marble like gunshots. Brian took longer. He sat staring at the papers, pen hovering, while his lawyer whispered urgently. Finally, he signed. As he stood to leave, he saw me. Our eyes met across the hallway. His were red-rimmed, devastated, pleading. He took a step toward me. "Dad," he croaked. "Dad, Don't." The word came out harder than I intended. I looked at my son, really looked at him, saw the boy he'd been, the man he'd become, the choices that led here. You chose this, Brian. You chose her, chose the lies, chose to destroy me rather than be honest. This is what choosing wrong looks like. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it. I turned away, started walking. You wanted me gone. Now you got your wish. Live with it. Please, his voice cracked. Please, Dad, don't. But I kept walking. Down the hall, through the doors, into sunlight that felt too bright. Behind me, I heard him break down completely, heard his lawyer trying to calm him. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might remember teaching him to ride a bike, might remember his graduation, his wedding, all the moments before everything went wrong. Better to remember what he'd tried to do. Better to remember Rosalia's terror, the police cars, Kimberly's torn blouse. Better to remember that my son had been willing to lock me away and steal everything I'd worked for. That night, alone in my apartment for the last time, I poured scotch and toasted the empty room. To justice, I murmured, and to the price of betrayal. The scotch burned, but not as much as victory. 2 months later, I stood in the foyer of my house again, and felt time fold in on itself. The same oak floors I'd chosen 30 years ago, the same crown molding I'd insisted on, the same morning light streaming through windows I'd positioned just so. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. "Mr. Carroll?" Rosalia appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Where do you want me to put the boxes from the study?" "Leave them for now. We'll sort through later." I smiled at her. "And Rosalia?" "It's just Richard. We've been through too much for formalities." She smiled back, the kind of smile that carried years of shared history. I'd hired her full-time at twice what Kimberly had paid her. Fair wages for extraordinary loyalty. The moving had taken 3 days. Brian and Kimberly had cleared out in 2 weeks instead of 30, taking only what was legally theirs, which wasn't much. The furniture I'd given them as wedding gifts stayed. The Mercedes they'd borrowed against, repossessed. The life they'd built on fraud and borrowed time, demolished. I settled into my old armchair on the back porch, coffee in hand, and surveyed the garden that had gone slightly wild in my absence. It would take work to restore, but I had time. Time and peace and possession of everything they'd tried to steal. Rosalia brought mail. "This came yesterday. I wasn't sure if you wanted to see it." Brian's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, even though it had been years since I'd seen it. The envelope sat heavy in my hand. I opened it slowly. "Dad," it began. No dear, no preamble. Just the word that felt both intimate and distant. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know. You were right. About everything. About Kimberly, about the money, about the choices I made. I was weak and stupid, and let myself be manipulated, because it was easier than standing up for what was right. Kimberly and I are divorcing. She blames me for losing everything, says I ruined her life by not being smart enough to outsmart my own father. I don't even argue anymore. She's probably right. I'm working 2 jobs now, trying to pay off the judgment and the debts we accumulated, living in a studio apartment in Pearland. It's not much, but it's honest. For the first time in 5 years, I'm living honestly. I think about you every day, about the man you were, the father you were, about how badly I betrayed all of it. I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. I'm sorry, Dad, For everything. Brian. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Walked inside to my study, restored and mine, and placed the letter in the top drawer of my desk. Maybe someday I'd answer it. Maybe someday the wound would scar over enough to allow reconciliation. But not today. Today I had a house to reclaim, a garden to restore, a life to rebuild from the ruins of betrayal. The doorbell rang, Rosalia answered, and I heard familiar voices, colleagues from my court days, dropping by to welcome me home. We spent the afternoon on the porch, drinking coffee and swapping stories, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt like myself again. As the sun set over the garden I'd planted decades ago, I stood alone on the porch and thought about dinners that never happened, about invitations that were traps, about sons who chose wrong and fathers who chose justice. They'd wanted a dinner, wanted me seated at a table of their design, consuming whatever poison they'd prepared. Instead, they'd gotten a 5-course meal of consequences, appetizer of legal action, entree of financial ruin, side dish of criminal charges, dessert of public humiliation, and an after-dinner mint of permanent separation. Not the menu they'd planned, but exactly what they'd earned. I raised my coffee cup to the empty air. To survival, I murmured, and to teaching old sons new lessons. Somewhere in Perlin, Brian was probably finishing his second shift, exhausted and alone. Somewhere out of state, Kimberly was probably scheming her next target, learning nothing. And here, in my house, on my porch, in my life, I was finally completely free. The evening air was sweet. The house stood solid. Justice had been served, and I had all the time in the world to enjoy it. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a triumphant smile, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd fought for what was his and won. The house lights glowed warm behind me. Rosalia hummed in the kitchen. The garden waited for morning and the work of restoration. And I was home. Finally, truly home. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.